The Mourning Star.
Chapter 13. Fly Me to the Moon. Commander Isaac sat with his hands on the two control sticks of the landing simulator, staring at the screen and trying to carefully guide the lander down to the moon's surface. He'd been at it for hours, and his success rate had not been nominal. He'd crashed and burned at least 8 times, either coming in too fast or because of an unexpected crater that had caught one of the lander legs before the lander had done a 360 and crashed onto the lunar surface. He was only going to have one shot at this when it was for real. "How are you doing, Commander?" Toru asked, looking over the shoulder of Jared and into the screen of the simulator. "Well, I'm doing my best to make sure we don't end up dying in a cloud of lunar regolith," he replied, looking up at the Japanese professor. "How are you guys doing with the VR? How does that whole thing work?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. Toru took a step back and crossed his arms around his chest. "Soda ni, chatomuzukashi deo ni," he spoke to himself softly. "It's quite complicated without going into my field of study, which is quantum mechanics. At the quantum level things become hazy, unsure, like a piece of live jazz music that moves along ambling until a beat comes that moves the whole band before doing it again and again. My virtual world has its own quantum mechanical properties at the local level, much like the one is on that server on the moon, but first they need to be in sync, so that the instruments can hear each other and we can synchronize the music of the composition. It is at this point Maya-chan, Elijah-kun and James will enter the VR space in the capsule. Belladonna and myself will monitor the systems and maintain their synchronicity until the commander looked Toru in the eyes. "One of the beats becomes the driving beat, the predominant reality," he said. "At this point classical mechanics takes over, and one or the other happens. So this is all or nothing, huh? This I can understand," he said, turning back towards the simulator and loading it up to run it from the beginning. Across the room, Maya looked over at Eli. They had been running through the VR space again and again, getting a feel for movement, communication, and distances in a generic small town based on the discretion Bella had given them. "It's a small town in western Massachusetts called Lee," she had said, bringing up a satellite image on the screen before they had put on the headsets. "The people you need to help are Michael and his friend Nancy. There is something in that town, something you need to find that I can't locate. It's been hidden by David. I've been trying to figure it out, but I haven't had much luck. David's power in that world is more concentrated. He can make some of them say and do things, and I can't always tell up from down when I am in his world. You wouldn't even recognize me when I am there." "I'm a cat," she said, and on the screen transformed herself into a sleek cat, her tail flicking in the air, and she jumped onto the table on the screen. Maya's eyes lit up looking at Bella. She'd always loved cats. "Kawaii," she exclaimed, looking at the sleek tiger-striped cat sitting on the desk in front of them. She looked like a leopard. "How does that help?" Elijah had asked, and Bella leaped across the room, landing on a tower nearby. "By manifesting myself in a smaller physical embodiment, I am able to have stronger control of the dark web, I guess you'd call it. Fabric of reality might be a better term. But even then I am too far away to manipulate his space like I can here," she said, reanimating herself into Belladonna once more. "That's where all of you come in. You all have a connection, an intuition, something I do not know how to explain, nor do I even know how to in any language any of you would understand, but from my calculations this plan, as unlikely as it sounds, is the most likely to succeed. But what are we even looking for? Do you know what it is or where it is?" James asked, stepping forward. He'd built these worlds from the ground up and knew how intricate they could get. "No. Right now, as we speak, Michael and Nancy are inside a facility buried deep under the code of this reality. Only they could penetrate its walls, as true natives, but while they are inside I cannot communicate with them. I'm hoping if we can pull the capsule close enough I can break through while you search his hometown. Before I first even interacted with him I felt like he found something. I felt it in my soul." She hesitated, searching for the right word, "something consequential. But I'm not sure what it is yet. And we won't know until we get there. John Bruckenheimer walked into the room just then, his barrel chest hiding behind a light blue button down. "All right, everyone," he said in a booming voice that echoed off the walls and across the room like the roar of a cannon. "Dragon has been mounted and fueling is commencing on the tank farm. We need to get you folks and your gear up to the launch pad. Let's go." And he waved them all through the door, each of them stuffing one or two last things in their bags. James and Eli carried the twin suitcases holding the VR gear they were taking, and all of them were wearing futuristic white space suits with the SpaceX logo on their shoulders. Once they were all outside, they piled into the Tesla Model X and sped across the tarmac to the historic launch pad 39B, where there, standing tall, was the Falcon Heavy with its 3 stages chilled from the liquid oxygen and methane pouring into their tanks. The frost was slowly creeping up the sides as a cloud of water vapor shimmered in the lights of the tower. They pulled up next to a large freight elevator where in the background they caught a glimpse of the rocket engines poking out from under the skirt of the rocket's body. The gullwing doors opened and they got out, stepping onto the cold black top of the launch pad. "Man, that thing is massive," Elijah said, staring up at the rocket like it was a skyscraper in the big city. "While it does have 1,700,000 foot-pounds of thrust from its 27 Merlin engines, technically she's the most powerful rocket in operation today, and certainly the only one that lands its boosters back on the ground," he said, chuckling to himself and hitting the large black button next to the entrance cage of the elevator. The gate shuddered as the elevator came rumbling down the shaft, and a few minutes later it came to a stop with a thud, and John pulled the gate open by a loop rope tied to the bottom. "I didn't think I'd see rope pulls at a space launch pad," Maya quipped, watching as the gate hit the roof with a clang. They piled into the big gated elevator, and once they were all inside, John pulled the rope again, this time pulling it down to his feet, before he stood up and hit the big yellow up arrow, and the lift began lurching upwards, with the rocket's body shining through in glimpses between the chain-link gating. Most of this equipment is quite old. Dates back to the 60s. "Built to last though," John said, banging his hands on the steel girder that made up the corner of the lift. "But it does the trick. No need to keep something shiny and new when you were just gonna blast it with all those Merlins down there." Maya looked down the rocket as the elevator lifted up through the air, the ground getting further and further away. She was nervous. And excited. She took a breath and closed her eyes, picturing that twirling merry-go-round in the Ghibli Museum. One moment it had been completely still. And then it become like a dream. She almost felt like that. She glanced over at her brother James and squeezed his hand. "You okay?" she asked, looking him in the eyes. James took a breath and looked up at the roof above them. He could see the Dragon capsule sitting there on top, with the jetway connected to the top of the tower. He looked at his sister. "I don't know," he said. "None of this seems real."